Good morning. I'm Donna Rosenberg from Jameson Legal, and I'm Director and Head of In-house for UK and Europe. Today I'm joined by Robert Abbott, and we're doing a virtual interview in the series of interviews on the topic of the rise of the modern GC. Robert is an English-trained lawyer who moved to France right after being called to the Bar of London in 2000. He started his career in an intergovernment organisation in Switzerland called the CERN, European Organisation for Nuclear Research. A few years later, he made the move from public organisation to private before settling for a career in MedTech. He has spent the past 12 years in large multinational MedTech companies and in his last role at Stryker was responsible for a team of over 30 legal and compliance professionals covering the EMEA region. After living as an expat for 6 years, he moved back to the Geneva region with his family in 2020 and is working currently as an independent consultant, supporting clients in a number of industries and jurisdictions. Good morning, Robert. How are you?
Hi, Donna. I'm fine, thanks. How are you? Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We might get started with just understanding a bit more around what appealed to you to participate in the interviews today on the topic of the rise of the modern GC.
Yeah, super. Having me. Look, I think the role of in-house counsel is, in fact, often misunderstood. And for a young and upcoming lawyer, it may be very difficult to actually understand what's in it unless you've done internships with in-house lawyers. So I think it's a really relevant topic of discussion. And I'd say, well, I also like the format that you propose with these short interviews. I like the fact that it's not academic or theoretical, but rather about sharing experience and insight of individuals. So that's why. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, it's been a bit of a journey putting the topic together, in that, it took me, a bit of time speaking to people like yourself just to really understand exactly what the types of questions would be and how that would translate into the interviews. So your input today is very much welcomed. And again, thank you very much. So looking at your time in-house as legal counsel, looking back now, was there anything that may have triggered your move in-house? Anything that you could identify that was that moment in thinking, I'd really like to move in-house?
Yeah. Well, I think there wasn't one single trigger. I think it was progressive, let's say, the realization that brought me to an in-house role. And it started as a young student. I was actually fortunate enough to have friends and mentors who helped me identify what it was I was looking for in a career and where I was most likely to get it. And then several internships with companies, but also law firms, allowed me to confirm my analysis. And I think if I look back, I really think what had the biggest impact was my understanding of my own personality and what I was looking for and how that fits with an in-house role. So I'm someone who tends to look for win-win solutions, and that's whether it's in my private life or professionally. I'm not someone who likes or seeks to win at someone else's expense. And I think that mindset in and of itself is very compatible with an in-house role. There's another element of my personality, which is that I find it less rewarding to go solo than to actually work within a team toward a bigger goal. And that teamwork and working toward a project which is greater than an individual project was also something that I found in-house. And then the third thing is that I've always looked at law as a tool, so not as an end in itself, but rather a catalyst which can help drive larger projects. So projects of R&D or collaboration, sales, whatever it may be. But so I think all of those elements of my personality put together meant that I was quite naturally attracted to in-house positions, and I think my 20 years of experience as an in-house counsel now have proven that was the right choice to make.
And looking at all of that experience that you've accumulated over that 20 years, if you could look back now and maybe avoid some of those pitfalls, what would they be? What would be your advice or the benefit of the experience you could offer others?
Yeah. Well, of course, it's easy to speak, with the hindsight, right? So I don't know if we're able to avoid pitfalls per se, just looking back at what we did in the past, but at least it creates awareness and hopefully a better ability to analyze the situation that you're facing. I'll speak of a few pitfalls here, some that I've experienced myself, but some that I've also seen my own team members fall into. So I think the first one that I would say is this belief maybe that all in-house roles are alike, and they're not. And you really need to ask yourself, what job am I looking for as an in-house counsel? So, the first distinction that you'll have is between expert roles and more general counsel type of roles. So the expert role will mean that you will be requested to provide your expertise in, data protection, intellectual property law, but you'll be an expert in that specific role. And you will see a certain activity within the company, and your career will be very much influenced by that expertise that you're bringing. However, if you're more of a generalist, you're going into a generalist role. There too, you can have distinctions between a generalist in a country, let's say in France, who is providing specific legal advice for France, and then that person's expertise will be really about French law, versus someone who may be going to a headquarter location and who may be asked to be covering, a number of countries and regions. So these are really very different roles. They require different skills, but they will also lead to different career paths within a company. And that brings me to pitfall number 2, which is that, you may have this belief that, as long as I'm performing, then the growth potential should be the same regardless of the role that I'm in. And I just think that's not true, and I haven't seen that to be true. The growth potential of your role will depend on, what role you've chosen, where is your job located, and can you carry over your skill sets, or can you broaden them to grow that role over time? There are other elements in this too, in terms of growth potential, which can also relate to company culture, for example. So if you're going into, let's say, a multinational company with a more American or Anglo-Saxon culture, you can be very effective as, let's say, an Italian lawyer with an Italian or Latin culture supporting the Italian team. But how translatable are those skills then, and is that culture, if you are considering that you want to grow in the company and then start advising the higher up managers and leaders who will be more, let's say, Anglo-Saxon in their culture. Mm-hmm. And so that risk of not seeing that ability to transpose your knowledge and your experience to higher graded roles is something to contend with early on and to understand. And that brings me to the third point, which is actually company culture. And this is a mistake that I made myself when I first went into my first in-house role within a company. I didn't give enough importance to company culture, and I actually left that company after 2 years because of the lack of culture fit. And I think it's really important when you do your interviews to try and figure out what that culture is, and is it a culture that resonates with you and with your values and with the way you like working. So things that you can see, for example, is is it, as I said earlier, is it more an Anglo-Saxon culture? Is it a Latin culture? Is it a culture that allows for small kingdoms and queendoms, right, or silos, or is it more of an inclusive culture? Is it a culture that values supporting roles? You'll see many companies that say, well, what we do is we sell, and therefore our salespeople are first-class citizens, right? And then maybe supporting roles are more second-class citizens, right? So is that something that you're comfortable with, and is it something that you can that you can thrive in? So I think you need to ask yourself when interviewing, does this seem like a place where I can learn and thrive and live according to my values? Because it's when you do that, I think, that you deliver the best of yourself. And then once you're in the company, you may think that, well, I really need to just deliver, right? Deliver on these contracts, deliver on this analysis and so forth. And the risk is that you don't spend enough time investing actually in building a network, understanding who your stakeholders are. I think the relationships in-house are absolutely key to the success, the success of the department and then your personal success. So I think bottom line is it's really a very different role to working in a law firm. And you really need to ask yourself these questions. What are you looking for? What is drawing you to that culture or that company? And do you see in that company what it is that will make you thrive, both in terms of the role, but then also in terms of the culture?
Yeah, they're really good points. Thank you, Robert. And definitely, I think, when you look at technical skills, without a doubt, this is vitally important that you have the technical capability. But I always encourage candidates that are interviewing with clients that, it's really important to make sure that you understand exactly what the culture is, but also that you invest and buy into your manager as well. And this will lead into the next question, because it's important that they are able to nurture some of those softer skills. So in that respect, what do you see are the qualities that are important when you may recruit for a legal team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And you may find the more junior lawyers or people who are starting their career to believe that, well, if they can prove their hard skills, their knowledge of the law, then that should suffice. And while it's true, you have to be a good lawyer. Yeah. That goes without saying, but it's not enough. And it's not the thing that will make you stand out. There are enough good lawyers out there, right, for that to no longer be a differentiating factor. So you need to be able to prove more than that. And I think the question now is really, well, what? And if you go onto social media and you read reports and so forth, you hear a lot about recruiting for talent and recruiting for diversity and so forth. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but what I've seen more often than not is that hiring managers tend to be very risk averse. And rather than saying, I found this hidden gem of talent and diversity that will bring a totally different angle to my team, I think what they're rather looking for is someone who will, first of all, be able to bring immediate value, hit the ground running, and someone who will not be too high maintenance or too disruptive to the team. So I think the first things you need to be able to sell and show the hiring manager in an interview is obviously your ability, but then after that, your loyalty, right? So your ability to follow a leader, to follow a department and the strategy and the mission of that department. And then third, I would say energy. You need to show that you're going to be coming in there with a lot of energy, with oomph, and you're going to help the department as a whole. Personally, when I recruit, I also look for curiosity in candidates and the ability to think strategically or futuristically. I think that's becoming more and more important today for in-house lawyers because industries are changing, technology is morphing, the regulatory environment in many industries is changing too. And you need lawyers in-house who are able to spot future issues, right, like icebergs, ahead, and deal with them very early, rather than kind of say, well, we'll deal with it when we hit, the iceberg with our boat. So those are things that I would look for, and are some of the qualities that I think are needed. And on the flip side, I would say there are certain qualities which I don't think go very well with in-house roles. And I've generally seen people who are more of, let's say, the command and control type feel frustrated in-house roles, right? If you are someone who needs to be the hero of the day, and win negotiations at all cost, it's probably not for you, because more often than not, when you're in-house, it's not about you. It's not about your personal prowess. It's about what the team is doing. It's about how the legal department can bring the company forward.
And again, this probably works into the next question as well, when you're talking about winning negotiations and bringing a different level of prowess, and it probably moves into the next question around risk and what the key is to really understanding this in an in-house environment.
Okay, so risk. So you can think about risk from a legal perspective, but I don't think that's the way you need to think about it when you're in an in-house position. I think the very first thing you need to do when you think about risk is take off your legal hat, in fact. You're running a business support function, not a law firm. So you really need to think about the risk from a business perspective. And it can be anything from, okay, what's the risk in sourcing these raw materials, to what's my intellectual property risk, or what's the risk of future regulation change, geopolitics, product defects, earthquakes, anything like that could be disruptive to the business that you're there to look after. So the first thing is take off your legal hat, understand the business, and look at things holistically. Once you have, I think, good grasp on that risk, and it requires interactions with different people within the company, whether they're in supporting functions like R&QA or the business and the sales and so forth. You really need to understand, well, what is the company's knowledge and understanding of that risk, first of all? I mean, are they aware of it or not? And then what is the company's appetite for risk? Because depending on the company, well, the appetite will be very high, or they'll just accept that they don't want to spend too much time dealing with that risk, so they're happy enough to live with it. So what is their appetite for risk? And then the third step for me is moving on to let's say, educating your internal stakeholders about the risk, right? So obviously you need to analyze the legal components of that risk, but you need to also work with all of these other people to understand, well, how would this risk impact you? What is your plan in the event that you encounter that risk? And then how do you exit that risk? So this is, when you deal with a risk, it's absolutely not about, simply dealing with it in a contract, right? And having the right liability exclusions. Yes, that might be a little element of risk mitigation in contractual relationships, but it's absolutely not the end all of risk assessment and risk management in a company. And again, back to the point that I made earlier, I think a lawyer really needs to have an absolute holistic understanding of the business and the risk environment. And this is something which differentiates the in-house lawyer from the lawyer from a law firm. A lawyer from a law firm will never be able to understand as much as you do in-house about how the business operates, what the risk appetite is, where the risk elements are, and then what mitigation plans could even work for that company.
Very interesting. Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much for everything today, and all the information and insight that you've given. Just on finishing up, is there anything that you wanted to add in terms of, thinking about, going back to somebody making a decision to move in-house or somebody looking at that next step? Is there anything?
Yeah, there is one last thing, and it's kind of back to this idea of growth, and we often talk about how managers need to nurture their teams, and of course managers have a lot of importance, and it's important, I think, when you do your interviews to see who the hiring manager is. Will that person be your manager, and is that person interested even in allowing you to grow? But I would say at the end of the day, your growth is really your responsibility, and so you need to think about that right from the start, as we talked about in the previous questions, and you need to think about whether that environment is an environment in which you can grow, and then what tools will it make available for you to be able to go along that growth path. I've often told people in my teams, my role is to have a pot with great earth in it, but you're the seed, and it's up to you to grow within that pot. I have to make sure the pot is big enough so that you grow to your fullest potential, but I'm not the one who's pulling the seed and making the leaves grow. That's what you do. So I think that's something which is really important for people to realize. They shouldn't come in the house thinking, well, someone will look after my career and my growth. So yeah.
As it is in all things life.
Yeah.
If anybody has any additional comments or questions for Robert or myself, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can do so on my email, which is donna.rosenberg@jamisonlegal.com. Again, thank you very much for your time, Robert. It's been great collaborating with you on this. And just a little bit more about Jamieson Legal. We're an international recruitment company, and we recruit for legal and compliance positions, and we do that for law firms, professional services, industry and commerce. Thanks again. Take care, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Donna.
Thanks, Robert.
Bye-bye.